Welcome to Spirited Take, brought to you by the community. Start over again. Welcome to the community church in the Spirited Take. My name is Tom Dickelman, and with me, as always, are Sean Miller and Matt Duar. And we're here for our first episode of 2021. I'd like to begin with words from L.B. Knost. I quote, "Life is amazing, and then it's awful. And then it's amazing again. And in between the amazing and the awful is ordinary and mundane and routine. Breathe in the amazing, hold on through the awful, and relax and exhale during the ordinary. That's just living a heartbreaking, soul-healing, amazing, awful, ordinary life. And it's breathtakingly beautiful." End quote. Now, Knost's words all sound pretty balanced. The problem is for most of us these days as we begin 2021 is life doesn't feel quite so balanced. It's not steady between being amazing and ordinary and awful, and then repeating that pattern. Instead, the past year for most of us has seemed to have had a lot more awful than amazing or even ordinary. And as we start 2021, it seems that there are so many of us who are desperate to make a change, to press a restart button and begin things anew, and try and shape our lives in a way that has a little more amazing. And so the question, as people are yearning and desperate for change, is how do we do that? How do we turn things around? And so to talk about that for just a moment or two are Matt and Sean. And so I pose the question to you, Matt. If someone were to come up to you and say, how do I get a fresh start in 2021? What would you share with them?
That's a great question. And the desire for change is I don't even know where I'm going with this right now. What I'm trying to say is my brain just totally died. Is that there? People would love to have the magic pill that allows folks to change. Behavior change is really complex and mysterious, and there's no real clear pathway to it. Some people change spontaneously in a moment. Other people spend years grinding and trying to change, only to find out that they're still in the same place. So it's really a mystery. I'm not answering your question.
Well, yeah, let me interrupt for a second. Is it behavioral change? Certainly that can be part of it. Or is it more how we look at life and a change of attitude that can reshape people's experience?
I mean, I would say perception and attitude are behaviors. They're just behaviors that are more subtle and harder to look at. They eventually manifest as overt behaviors that we can look at. I think I'm totally crashing this conversation, so to put it back into a place where it'll be productive.
That's why we have you here, to make us look both smart and good.
Keep it between the lines.
I think it's important to make a distinction between change and transformation, first and foremost. Change is inevitable. We're always changing. But that doesn't mean we're changing into anything that represents or expresses a higher sense of value or intentionality or meaning. And I think what we're really trying to talk about is transformation. And transformation is a specific kind of change that is driven by a sense of value. So that when we transform, we move from one state to another, and the state we move into ultimately represents a greater level of insight, a greater level of mastery, a greater level of skill, etc. And when I talk about this with students, I often use the quote, I think it's Michelangelo. Michelangelo made the angel, right? The angel sculpture, I think.
Yeah, he moved from one state to another when he went from Illinois to Florida.
And
Go
I
ahead.
was just going to say that.
Anyways,
you took my line. Gosh.
I think it's,
Now what am I
I think
gonna
it's
say?
Michelangelo. And he's got that quote where he says, I saw the angel in the marble and I carved until I set him free. And I think goal setting is a way of that quote serves as an analogy for authentic and meaningful goal setting, which is really a process of transformation. That we look into the future, and at the beginning of the year is always a wonderful time to evaluate our current behaviors and ask ourselves, is my current lifestyle regime leading me to a better place? Is it just maintaining what is, or is it leading me to a place where I don't necessarily, want to go to that place? So is it an upward trajectory, level, or downward? And so I think at the beginning of the year, asking yourself kind of where are you at, where are you aiming, and looking into the future and saying, well, this is my block of marble, so to speak, and what do I want to carve out of 2021? What's a version of myself and a version of my life that's compelling and represents a higher sense of value and intentionality?
Let me interrupt for a second. So, true or false, if someone came to you and they were seeking some change in this coming year and you talked about transformation, true or false, you would encourage them to set specific goals?
Before I would have them set goals, sorry, I'm not being very clear today. It's an emerging theme coming out of this conversation. What I'm trying to say is that I would first have them reflect on their values.
Okay.
What do you believe to? Just this past Monday night in our wellness class for the church, I asked everyone to take some time and write down your response to this question. What do you believe to be most valuable, meaningful, and true about yourself and about life? And it's a small question, right? But when you start to sit down and develop and articulate in higher resolution what your value system is, then you can ask yourself what outcomes 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 12 months from now will ultimately express and embody the values you want to instantiate and bring into the world. And so goal setting often begins, it's really turned into a cumbersome process where people just immediately jump to outcomes that they want,
right,
without really thinking about what they value. And what that ends up doing when you don't think about what you value is you just end up kind of perpetuating busyness.
So, so if what I hear you're saying is really a look at your values precedes goal setting, and a way to assess those is to ask yourself or write down or reflect on, what do I hold to be most valuable, most meaningful, and true. And I think that's a great start for anyone right there. Let's jump over to Sean and wake him up.
Good morning.
And Sean, are you someone when you transition from one year to the next, do you sit down and write out goals for the coming year?
I don't. I'm not a big goal setter, to be honest, in that way. But I would say that the image that Matt just described, the Michelangelo from Florida. Did Michelangelo live in Florida? Anyway.
He moved to Naples when he retired.
For the tax. Anyway. Michelangelo and this notion of pulling what is beautiful out of that marble. As a minister, I would ask the question, is that not an image of what God is trying to do with us, with me, every day? Take what is marble and continue to chisel and continue to work and continue to change, because I don't think I am capable of anything near the change that God, who is love, is capable of doing in me. So for me, if I'm going to set a goal every day, the intention is to pay close attention to that. How am I being chiseled to be more compassionate, to be more merciful, to be more loving, to be all the things that God would want from me, more than my ability to sit down at the beginning of a year and say, okay, what am I going to do to achieve X, Y, and Z? So I tend to want to be more interested in paying attention to the one who is about the sculpting, which I think is always is God.
And if I came to you, Sean, and sat down with you in the church office or on a Zoom call or phone or something like that and said, you know what, last year was, a dumpster fire of a year, and I need to turn things around. What would you tell them?
Pay attention to your life. It's the old Fred Buechner, listen to your life. Prayer is listening. Prayer is paying attention. Some people can do that through journaling. Some people can do that through meditation. Some people do that through a variety of means. But whatever would allow you to pay more attention, because I think a lot of times I struggle with a kind of a spiritual numbness, kind of floating through and not, as Matt has talked to us before about taking action and finding forward motion, rather than just this feeling of numb in the world. What is it? Pay attention to your life. Pay attention to what God might be doing. And I guess I keep coming back to that, and we can talk about what that means and what is God, and that question of what is God doing in your life. But what is love doing in your life? What is mercy doing in your life? And I would encourage someone to explore that more than what can I do on my own to achieve something that I think is important.
And what's interesting to me in listening to you both is Sean mentions prayer a couple times, and Matt mentions values. To me, I often talk about prayer as not something that always changes things, but it always changes us. But also in a very big way, prayer for me is a reminder each and every day of what my values are. As I pause to give thanks or have a sense of gratitude for different kinds of things in my life, or praying for those people who are having a tough time, those prayers tend to be a reflection of my values, and that's where prayer and the values that you're talking about, Matt, I think come together. Any other thoughts you have to share, Matt, in terms of helping people move amidst the challenges we have in our country right now, and whether it's what's going on with our government, or whether what's happening with COVID, or challenges with the economy, or families struggling with Zoom school and all those sorts of things, and not to mention the challenges everyone has day in and day out in their family life. What would you say, anything else you'd say to someone who was really trying to get a fresh start and have as positive of an experience in 2021 as they can?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a number of really complex issues that compose our political and social landscape right now, and finding solutions to those is above my pay grade. But what I will say is that I'm quoting lots of people here today, but just Gandhi's notion of be the change you want to see in the world. Make sure your own house is in order before you go out and tell other people how they should be living. And so start with your own lifestyle regime. And I think, for me personally, I think goal setting is a wonderful opportunity to actually, it's like a ship at sea. If you don't have a port that you're sailing to, then on what basis are you determining where you're going and what you're doing? And so by establishing goals that, again, hopefully represent a higher sense of value, whether that's a relationship with God, whether that's prayer, whether that's fitness, whether that's intellectual development, or all of the above, if you don't articulate those things and create outcomes that one can actually determine whether they've been achieved or not, then you're just kind of self-talking and idling, in my opinion. And so it's important to establish a context within which you can actually evaluate and assess whether or not meaningful change, transformation, has actually occurred. Because we can sit and ponder all sorts of things, and that's not necessarily a meaningless exercise, but at some point I think it needs to translate into objectives, things that need to occur. And one last piece here that I'll offer is I think it's important to distinguish aspirations. I think when I work with people on this, there's three things. There's the value, then there's the aspiration, and then there's the goal. And so the value might be the preciousness of time. And the aspiration is I want to be someone who's grateful. And the goal is every night before I go to bed for 5 minutes, I'm going to list 5 things I'm grateful for and explain why I'm grateful for them, what they contribute to my life. And so there's that nice progression between identifying what's important, aspiring to be a person who's living their life that's pointed in the direction of that value, and then actually creating a concrete behavior that allows you to determine whether or not your daily regimes and behaviors are actually in alignment with that aspiration and that value. If that makes sense.
Very good. Yeah. Let's give the Reverend Sean Miller the final word. Sean, any last thoughts for the good of the cause?
Well, I think you listed all of these things that are facing us, these huge, complex questions, and I guess 2 things real quick. One is it reminds me of that old expression from Tip O'Neill when he would say, all politics is local. And I think we can translate that to faith. All faith, at the end of the day, is local. So we're faced with big challenges, big overriding issues, and I think we feel sometimes like we don't have any control or we don't have any agency. Matt's talked before about agency. We can't do anything about all these things. But I actually think our challenge is to remember that we actually can. And when Jesus was questioned by the disciples about these big challenges that were facing his day, what is the kingdom of God like? What is eternal life? He would say, you know what? It reminds me of a story about a father and his sons. Or it reminds me of a mustard seed. Or it reminds me of a loaf of bread and how it rises with leaven. And he would talk about all these very local, small ways that he would demonstrate the ways that big things can be changed. So I guess my point is, I think we can make a difference from the ways that where we buy our food and from whom we shop and the ways that we treat other people, all kinds of things we can think about. And maybe if we're going to start a year off right, it would be to list the things that we can actually do to make a difference, to chip away in our own local way of these huge problems that we're facing as a society.
And that list can be made based either on our values and strengthening the values that we have in our lives, or the problems that we're seeking to neutralize.
Yeah, right.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. Yeah,
Tom,
Matt.
Can I interrupt here real quick?
You can. I certainly have interrupted you. Go for it.
I'll throw in that just came to mind because it's an exercise I do with students at school. Is we do an exercise where we develop our own personal philosophy. And so I ask that question to students: what do you believe to be most valuable, meaningful, and true? And so they spend some time, and I say, I really want you to dive into this. And so they write 2 or 3 pages on it. And then I ask them, what are the experiences through which these values emerged in your life? How do you know that honesty is important? How do you know that service or kindness, how do you know that those things are important? Was it through a person? Was it through an experience? Was it through the absence of that thing that led you to believe how important it is? Honesty, that's one thing for many people that I've seen, is that it's often the absence of being honest that makes one realize just how important honesty is. And we've all experienced that, where we haven't been truthful and we realize, wow, I can't continue to live in this way and be who I want to be if, whatever. And so they write all of this out. And then I say, okay, and we have a whole conversation about it. And then I say, okay, I want you to take what you've written and I want you to put it in 20 words or less. And then they put it in 20 words or less. And then we go over the 20-word statement. And then I say, okay, I want you to put it into 3 words or less. A life philosophy bumper sticker, if you will. And so they're like, oh, you got to be kidding me, right? So they put it into 3 words, and they create this little mantra or motto. And then I tell them to put that somewhere where they're going to see it every day. On the locker, on the computer, in the car, in your backpack, wherever it is. And I want you to identify a daily ritual that brings you into connection with those 3 words. Right? And so this is a wonderful way of just creating positive momentum. You've got your little life philosophy motto, and you've got a touchstone activity that allows you to anchor yourself to those beliefs through some little ritual. And then from that, you can expand out and incorporate other things. But at the very least, at least for however many minutes a day, you've got one simple activity that allows you to live in alignment with your aspirational self, which I think is really important.
Very cool. A little bit different than what I experienced from my teachers just a few years ago at Glenbard West High School. Anyways, Sean, thank you very much. Matt, thank you very much. Thanks to Ken Hall for putting this together. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time on A Spirited Take.